Hi, welcome to the Kony Technology Platform video series. In this particular video, I would like to demonstrate how we use the Kony Inline Debugger tool to debug and troubleshoot our apps. One of the cool features about this tool is that while our app is actually running in the emulator, we can put breakpoints in our code and have it hit those breakpoints, examine variables to do some troubleshooting to see what's going on. So I wanted to use this example to show you how we set that up. In this particular case, in this app, as we click through each of these categories, it brings up the subcategories, and we can keep drilling through up until the point where there's no more subcategories, and then it shows all the products. Okay, so just for the sake of argument, let's just say we're having an issue with the subcategory management, and we want to put in a breakpoint, and let's see what's happening when we make that service request to get those subcategories. We want to examine what's really happening, make sure we got things set up right. So here's how we do that. So in the main tool, when we build our app, we already took a look in one of the previous videos at what the outputs are, and the outputs are the generated, installer for that app. Well, we also generate a set of Lua files that represent the form, represent our code, all those other pieces of the app, and we're going to use those generated pieces of data to use in our debugging. And here's how that works. So our navigator view shows us what's happening on the underlying file system. So here's our app, and there's a folder that's not shown in the application view called Lua source. And the idea is that for each of these different things that I've built, the Android, BlackBerry, iPhone, J2ME, Win Mobile, it will create subfolders of all the generated and non-generated code. Non-generated code being that code which I've written myself. So there's not a whole lot to do because it's Lua. It didn't need to generate the Lua, so it's just representing the non-generated Lua, the Lua that I typed in. The generated stuff are things like the form itself. So this will be the Lua representation of the form, and it'll show you the application initialization cycle and the creation of all the widgets and things like that. So to keep it simple, let's stick to troubleshooting our category navigation code. So I have to bring it up, the specific module that I'm interested in troubleshooting for the specific device that I'm going to do the debugging. So in this case, we're working on our Android emulator, so I need to make sure I'm in the Android folder. And as we look at our things, my code, I've got a get categories method which gets the initial set of categories, and then when you click it, this is the code that actually is triggering the getting the subcategories. And let's take a look and see what's going on there. So, I figure out what was selected from the screen. There's a little debug print statement. And then we set our input parameters to our service call that says, I want to make the get categories call, and I want to use that category whose ID is that previous thing that was selected on the form. And then I want to call my app middleware invoker method, which will actually trigger that service request to the back end and retrieve the data into this variable called category list. So let's just put a breakpoint right here on this category list because we want to stop right there. We want to make the service call, but we want to stop, and let's take a look at what our input parameters were, and let's take a look at what gets returned back, and we'll assume that that's the troubleshooting we need to do. That's going to give us the information we want. Okay. I've configured the system to launch the Android emulator when I say it's time to go into debug mode. So what I expect is that when I say it's time to debug, it's not only going to launch the emulator, but it's going to launch the whole debug mode. So there it is. I've clicked that, and it's starting to load it, and what we'll see is it'll actually load up the debug version in front of us. And this is what we're going to start to manipulate so we can go look at the various variables. Now, the standard Kony view doesn't give us a whole lot of help debugging, so we've created this debug view. And the debug view is really what we're going to be using when we're troubleshooting, because this is actually going to give us the ability to look at our variables, our breakpoints, manage breakpoints, step into, step over, and things like that. Okay, so here's my app. So again, we didn't put any breakpoints on the initial load, but when I click one of these, we should now hit our breakpoint. And there we go. So I just clicked, what was it, GPS, audio and MP3. So we can start now going and let's take a look at what happened here. So let's first of all look at our input parameters and make sure we got those set right. So right here in input parameters, I can scroll down and I can go, all right, here's the category I'm saying that I am currently at. Here's my debug key for the Best Buy, and then here's the method call. So far that looks good. Let's say I know that that looks good. Now what I want to do is execute this next step and see what comes back in category list. So to do that, I will use the step over function, which will execute this line and then stop at the next line of code that is empty. Okay. Now category list has been populated from this service call, and I want to take a look at what this category list is. So sure enough, here's category list, and we can start to expand it. Now with any service call, we get back some information around op status, which was 0, which means it was successfully called. That's good. Here's the name of the category we clicked, audio and MP3. Yep, that sounds about right. And here's the corresponding category that was used to generate the subcategory list. And then here are our subcategories. And it looks like our subcategory came back with several subcategories, 9 of them to be exact. And we've got iPod and MP3 players, audio system and component, and so on and so on. Okay. So if I let this now continue, what we should see, assuming everything's working correct, is the next screen will show iPod, MP3, audio system, and so on. So now we can simply just say continue running. And then when we look at our emulator, sure enough, home audio, here's our iPod and MP3. And again, we can repeat the same thing for audio system and components. We can come in here, step over that, and let's go look at our category list, and now our subcategories are going to be CD players and recorders and shelf systems and so on. So sure enough, I will go ahead and play that, and now the app is showing CD players and recorders, shelf systems and receivers. Okay. The key takeaway here is that in debugging, we have access to all the variables. We can manage our breakpoints by turning them on or off in this view. So if we've got them scattered throughout a whole bunch of different modules, we can here in one place turn them on or off as we can if we're looking at the file themselves by just toggling the breakpoint like this. Okay, so that was a quick view into how Preview works on the Android. Preview also works on iPhone in the exact same way. So what we need to do there is, since we're going to switch devices, we can no longer debug this particular file because that was an Android file. So we need to kind of restart our debugging process for the iPhone. So let's go ahead and do that by terminating this debug session. We can close out that view because we're not interested in that file. And let's go to our navigator, and now let's go into our iPhone. And just to keep things the same, let's actually use the same file, but this time it's the iPhone version of the file. And let's go find that same line of code. All right, so there was a breakpoint from a previous example. Let's just turn that off. And here we go. Here's our same category list. So we'll toggle the breakpoint on. And same thing, we're going to then say I want to debug it, debug the Kony application, build it with the debug option, yes. Okay. We still had our automatic launch, but that's okay. Now let's bring over our team viewer session and show what's going on the iPhone itself. All right. So we've got our debugger running, ready to go. Now what we need to do on the iPhone is actually launch the app so that we can trigger that breakpoint. All right. We've seen this before when we go into the iPhone and we launch our Perl script to bring over the app. Here we're going to do it in a different directory. There's this debugger directory, so that's where we want to do our work. So I'm going to cd to the debugger. Okay, and let's take a look at what we have there. And you'll see that in here, I've got my debugger Xcode project. All right, so I can just run that debugger.xcode proj. All right, and that came up, again, defaulting to the simulator for the 4.0. We'll run our app, okay, and we'll click on audio video and we'll see that it's paused. So back here in the real world, in our IDE, sure enough, we've hit our breakpoint. We can start to drill through and say, all right, what is the input parameters? Here's our get categories, here's our category. We can do a step over and then go look at our categories that come back for the subcategories. And again, we see all that stuff. And then when we choose to continue running back here in the Mac environment, it's done and proceeded. And sure enough, we hit the next one, hits the breakpoint, and it's the same thing played out over again that we just did on the Android. Okay, so debugging is an essential part of working with Kony applications. Actually, while the app is running on the device, we can have remote control into the code that's running, stop, breakpoint, examine variables, and do our troubleshooting remotely. Thank you for attending. That was the debugging video. Bye-bye.